Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this 72nd scale Sd.Kfz 234/2 Puma from Magic Factory. We're going to find out if they've really manufactured magic. If you'd like to look at the sprues and other bits and pieces that come in the box, I did a separate What's in the Box video about that. It's linked below somewhere, go check it out. It seemed like a really good idea to begin construction of the Puma with the wheels. Also, the instructions do say to do this. The hub part goes into the rim nice and easy. There are 2 hubs to choose from. There's no indication if these belong to a specific variant or not, so I just chose at random. Then the tyres can go on. These are rubbery tyres, and you get the choice of 3 different tread patterns. 3. I don't know anything about German tyre treads in World War II, and I'm sure it is very, very important, but I chose at random again. As you can hopefully see, there are 9 wheels with nicely fitted tyres. The 9th wheel is a spare. This has a slightly different rim, but assembly is the same as the rest of the wheels. The wheels do need somewhere to go, so why not build some suspension? The 2 axle parts are slightly different for each end of the assembly. You can tell by looking at them. They are also quite fine and nicely detailed. Once you've got both axle doovers in around the right way, this bottom plate, I guess you might call it, goes into place. The fit is really good, and you shouldn't encounter any resistance here. When you've got both assemblies together, there's another bottom part that runs the length of the Puma, and these axle assemblies drop into place here very nicely. Why not then install the whole bottom? If you don't, you won't be able to progress much further than this. This is very simple, and the result is quite nice. This kit does have some interior detail, but the only piece of that I installed is the floor. It pretty much just drops right in. I'm sure it all looks nice, but what's the point if you only see it when you're building the kit and then never again? So I move on to something that's really important, the wheels. In a completely unsurprising turn of events, these go onto the axles here. This is easy, though there is a little bit of play, so you'll probably have to nudge them a bit so they are not all wibbly wobbly. If, like me, you also assembled the spare wheel, you'll need to set that aside and make sure not to lose it. Now it's time for photo etch. If you've been around my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm not a big fan, and this was kind of annoying to do. Not because of any annoying bending or anything like that, but mostly because it was quite fiddly to get all of these little doodads lined up with pretty much nothing to really hold them. The result I got isn't nearly as good as I wanted it to be, though I guess maybe the fact that it looks damaged could be a positive. I install that assembly into the hull anyway. You do get the option of a plastic part for this, and I feel like maybe I should have used that. Too late now though, it's in place, and it's not hard to put in place. I follow that with some more vents. This time, I've used the plastic part. It certainly does look a lot different. I guess now the model is a bit inconsistent, but I don't really care that much. I then put these doors or hatches or whatever you'd like to call them down the outer edges of the engine deck. Nothing too tricky here. Why not then install the fighting compartment roof and turret holding part? This part more or less drops right into place, and so does this plate in the front of the hull. Nice and easy. I then install the various vision hatch doovers around the hull. If you look at them, you'll notice not all of these are the same, so you should probably pay attention to where the instructions say to put them. That's what I did. Next, I add this little thing. It's an antenna mount. There's nothing to guide it into place, so you've just got to eyeball it. If I did this again, I think I would put this a millimeter or 2 further forward. Why not follow that with a good old-fashioned hull joining? There isn't really anything to guide this beyond the shape of the parts, which I guess actually is something, but I think you know what I mean. The fit is fairly good. You don't have to do too much, though it's not a bad idea to apply some pressure for a few moments. I then add this little hatch part into the whole rear part, which is about as simple as it could be. That's a nice butt plate, if I do say so myself. It made sense to then install that on the whole rear. It fits fairly well, though there is a little bit of a gap on the lower ride. I'm not sure if that's my fault, or a problem with the kit, or both. I did my best to eliminate it with some pressure. I would say though that it's nothing too major. You could easily fix that with putty. These tiny parts will form the mounting bracket for the spare wheel. Their size, unsurprisingly, does make the parts a little bit fiddly to get together, but not impossible. I glue that assembly into the rim of the spare wheel. I did it this way because I figured it would probably be a little bit easier than installing the bracket on the hull and then trying to join the wheel to it. I then install this little, I think it's just a handrail. It goes above where the spare wheel will mount. Then, and you're not going to believe this, I mount the spare wheel. This isn't too hard, but the tyre does kind of make it a bit hard to see where the mounting holes are. It's probably worth noting that I had been skipping around in the instructions at this point, mostly to try and avoid photo etch. That's just what rebellious Herbert does. After this point, the instructions want internal details added and the whole parts to be joined together. That's already been done, and partially omitted. So it's time to add more external details, starting with the side skirt things. I'm not really sure what you would call these. There's a lot of stowage boxes on here, so they're a bit more than skirts. Whatever. There are 3 sets of these side doovers you could choose from. The instructions only say to use the ones I did, and make no mention of the others. I'm not an expert on the Puma, which I'm sure is a big surprise. What that means is, I don't know what, if any, variants the other side parts are for, but they are included, so if you want to use them, I won't stop you. I then add the front bumper, which goes into place quite easily. And now it's time for more Herbert's Bane. You might know it as photo etch. These are some lifting lugs that go around the hull. They're not too bad. The most annoying thing about them is their small size. I then install the fire extinguisher. This is a tweezer job because I can't get my fat fingers in between the side of the hull and the fire extinguisher part. There's one of these on either side. It's time for headlamps. These are fairly easy to install, though it probably would have been a better idea to install this thing before installing the headlamps. I follow that with the ball-on-stick vehicle width markers, which is probably the technical term. You may need to do some nudging to get them just right, or close enough to just right. Here's a tiny little box of some sort. Is this a small ammo tin? Something one of the crew found? I've no idea, but the instructions say it goes right here, so that's where I put it. Here's another part with nothing to guide it. It seems to be some sort of filler cap. It has the little choose one icon in the instructions, but only one choice, so I assume that means it's optional. That would explain the lack of mounting hole. I opted to put whatever it is on. Then a shovel. It goes here. Everyone knows Puma crews really love to dig, and if you leave the shovel off, they get really sad. They also really like having a crank, to start the engine. At least that's what I assume this is for. Here's another part. I don't know what it is. That's weird, right? I think it might be a jack, like a small bottle jack, but it could be just about anything. Finally, a part Herbert has probably correctly identified. It's an ammo box. It goes here. It does look a little bit randomly placed, but who am I to argue with what the instructions want? Back to things I can't identify. This thing is comprised of 3 parts, and while it is small, thus a little bit fiddly, it's not too hard to get together. I set that aside to bond, and then I install a nice pickaxe here. The crew would be sad and angry if they were missing this essential digging tool, so we'd better not lose it. Why not follow that with the rear ball-on-stick vehicle width markers? I understand the Puma had rearward-facing driving equipment, so it makes sense to have these markers at the rear too. They're pretty much the same as the ones on the front. Next, I add this thing that I assembled all those moments ago. It goes on the right guard like so. This stowage box goes on the left rear, and it fits pretty well, though you can now see why I said I think the antenna mount should be a little bit further forward. I didn't video it, but I trimmed the edge of that mount just a little bit so the box would fit better. There were no such problems getting the stowage box onto the right side, because there's no antenna mount there, the box just drops into place. Just forward of that, I install another shovel. There are 2 of these so the crew don't end up fighting over the only shovel. Now they fight over 2. Here's the jack. I was kind of surprised that this is a single part. Most of the time, jacks are at least 2 parts. Not that I'm complaining, of course. It looks good, and it's easy to install. Forward of that, we've got these, I assume, gun cleaning rods. They're rods of some sort. There's no keying for them, but it seems like I've got them in the right place there, so that's where they've been glued. I heard you like tiny little bits of plastic, so here's a couple of tiny little bits of plastic. These go between the front bumper and the side guard. There's a little nubbin to guide it on the bumper end, but you'll have to eyeball the other end. I think I've got them more or less where they're meant to be. Time for some jerry can assembly. The 2 larger pieces of this assembly are pretty easy to put together. The little handle is a bit more fiddly than the 2 main parts on account of its small size, but it's certainly not impossible to get this right. I've done it, and so can you. Why not then install those jerry cans? There are 4 of these, and they all go on the front, like so. There's some helpful keying for these, so it should be fairly hard to do this wrong. On the rear, I add this little duver, which I think is a rear convoy light. There's a small nub for this to mount onto, so it's fairly simple. Speaking of small, there's a pair of small hooks that go on the rear sides of the hull. I found it moderately tricky to get them in the right place, but tweezers did help. On the right side, I add a tiny set of wire cutters, which was a lot more fiddly than it probably should have been to get them in the right spot, but I did get them there, I think. And then, a nice axe, for chopping. Sometimes you've just got to chop. To complete the hull, I add mufflers. The exhaust pipe that comes out of the engine bay is glued onto the muffler, and then that assembly is attached to the rear guard. There's one of these for either side. If you wanted to be real fancy, you could drill out the exhaust pipe. You will need a very small drill bit and some steady hands. I didn't do this. Anyway, that's the hull done, so now it's turret time. I start by assembling the gun breech. This won't be visible, but it is an integral part of the gun, so it is probably important. The machine gun is then slotted in through the back of the mantlet like so. I glue it into place so it stays there, also so the glue god won't smite me. I then try to combine the mantlet assembly with the turret front and gun breech. This seemed like it would be simple, and it probably is. However, I did struggle with it a little bit. It was just a bit fiddly to get the parts together and lined up how I wanted it. I'd then install that assembly on the turret bottom part. There are some supports there that should mean it's in the right place, but just to be sure, I test fitted with the top of the turret. Then I figured, why not just install that turret top? The fit is pretty good, and now I can be sure the front of the turret is in exactly the right place. Probably. Why not install the main gun next? This is a nice looking part, and it has some keying, so it's easy to get it lined up nice and neat without having the muzzle break at a weird angle. The 2 hatches more or less drop right into place. You can also model these open, and there's a couple of what seem to be hinge parts that you would use for that. You would probably also want to install these vision devices before trying to mount the hatches in the open position. I've clearly not modeled them open, so installing them now is easier. The turret might one day need to be lifted off, and if you want to do it in the realistic and prototypical way, you'll need to hook a crane onto these tiny little lifting hooks. Us regular folks will just use our fingers to lift the turret off the model. Smoke launchers are next. I found these to be kind of fiddly. There are some small guides to help position them, but they're just kind of an odd shape and they don't sit flat against the turret, so for whatever reason, it took a bunch of nudging and fiddling for me to get them to look right. This is almost certainly just a Herbert problem. I think I got them into a good position eventually. On the right side of the roof, there's a periscope doodad, which drops neatly into the circular recess intended for it. At the rear of the turret, I add this little antenna mount. There's not much to this, and that's the turret done. Remember when I said the hull was finished? I lied. That antenna mount, believe it or not, is the mounting point for an antenna. This antenna. I may have done it the slightly more difficult way by installing the rod and then putting the top part on, which wasn't really that difficult, but it might have been a bit easier to glue the 2 bits of the antenna together before putting it on the hull. Either way, it's in place, and now the hull is actually done. It's time to use that locking tab mechanism to join the hull and turret together. Nice. Let's get this out onto a tray. I mean, the spinny boy. Here's the completed 72nd scale Sd.Kfz 234/2 Puma from Magic Factory. Is it magic? Well, sure, I guess. If you define magic as a very nice model, then yes, it certainly is magic. I'm pretty happy with it. The only thing I don't really like is how messy the engine deck louver things are, but it's pretty easy to look past that. It is a very nice, well-detailed model, especially when you consider the scale. This thing is pretty small. It does seem like really well-detailed 72nd scale models are becoming more of a thing. No complaints from me, except maybe when they're extra fiddly, but they are still a great thing to have in the hobby. They might not be for everybody, but there is pretty much something for everybody. Maybe I'm starting to waffle. This was my first Magic Factory kit, and I'm impressed with it. It does look like this is their only 72nd scale offering, currently, though they do have some things in other scales, mostly more modern subjects. But this is cool, and if I see more World War II era stuff from them, I will certainly consider picking it up. The kit is quite well engineered, the parts are neat, and I didn't need to do a whole lot of cleanup. Any problems I had were really caused by myself, rather than actual issues with the kit. The The parts went together nicely, making for a fairly easy and fun build. It's probably not an ideal first kit for beginners, or if you've got bad vision. There's a few very small parts, but otherwise, I would recommend it if you want a Puma in 70-second scale. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live, I do stream modeling a couple of times a week over on Twitch. There's a link in the description, so come hang out. Subscribe here if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do, and you want to see videos a bit early, consider supporting on Patreon, links in the description. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.